October 28, 1944. Dawn breaks over the Kurland Peninsula, Latvia. Sergeant First Class Hermann Bix stands in the cupola of his Panther tank, exhausted. His crew has just spent the entire night rescuing 2 stranded Panthers from a hostile wooded ravine, fighting off Soviet infantry in the darkness, navigating treacherous terrain with a damaged tank. Now, as the first rays of sunlight pierce the morning mist, they've finally made it out of the woods. Bix allows himself a moment of relief. His 3 Panthers are intact. His crew is alive. They've survived the night. Then Gunner Crook's voice crackles over the intercom, excitement mixed with dread. "The Ivans are emerging from the woods, Sergeant." Bix takes a quick glance toward the edge of the wood line. His blood runs cold. "Here come the tanks!" On the right, approximately 800 meters away, a group of T-34 medium tanks emerges from the trees. And positioned alongside them, slightly to the rear, are several massive steel behemoths that make even the T-34s look small. Joseph Stalin tanks, IS-2S. One of these 51-ton monsters turns directly toward Bix's Panther, its 122mm gun traversing toward them with mechanical precision. That gun can penetrate a Panther's frontal armor from over a kilometer away. At 800 meters, Bix and his crew are well within its killing range. "Kruk, the big one first," Bix shouts. The gunner swiftly swings the long 75mm gun, aligning it with the looming Russian giant. Without hesitation, Kruk depresses the firing button. The Panther recoils from the force as the armor-piercing round surges toward the enemy. For a moment, Bix wonders if they're all about to die. Then he realizes something remarkable. This crew, strangers to him just days ago, are functioning seamlessly together. Kruk's second round finds its mark, striking the Stalin tank between its turret and hull. The heavy tank's cannon droops downward, disabled. Another round pierces the IS-2's armor, triggering flames that erupt from the exposed turret hatch. Then the Soviet tank blows up with a mighty explosion. This is the Battle of Kurland, where Germany's Army Group North, trapped like the doomed 6th Army at Stalingrad 2 years before, fights for survival against overwhelming Soviet forces, where Panzer aces like Hermann Bix face the most fearsome tank the Soviets have yet fielded, where every day might be your last. And for Bix, this is just the beginning of the most intense week of combat he will ever experience. In the fall of 1944, Germany's strategic situation had become desperate. On the Western Front, Allied forces were pushing toward the German border. In the south, the Soviets had liberated Romania and were driving into Hungary. And in the north, the Red Army had surged through the Baltic states with overwhelming force. Colonel General Ferdinand Schörner's Army Group North found itself stranded within Latvia's Kurland Peninsula, a piece of land jutting into the Baltic Sea. This isolated force held a formidable 160-kilometer front, stretching from the southern Baltic coast, extending toward Tukums, and reaching the Gulf of Riga to the east. Behind that fragile defensive line, the Red Army had put immense pressure on Army Group North, cutting them off from the rest of the German forces. It was Stalingrad all over again, a large German formation trapped in a pocket with only the sea as an escape route. But unlike Stalingrad, Hitler refused to allow a withdrawal. The Kurland Peninsula, he insisted, was a vital strategic position. It tied down Soviet forces that could otherwise be used against Berlin. It protected Germany's last access to Swedish iron ore shipped through Baltic ports. And perhaps most importantly in Hitler's increasingly delusional strategic thinking, it represented a foothold from which Germany could launch a counter-offensive once new wonder weapons turned the tide of war. None of this mattered to the soldiers trapped in the pocket. They knew the truth. They were stranded, surrounded, fighting a defensive battle they couldn't win in the long run. Sensing the urgency of the situation, Schörner mobilized a formidable force comprising 3 Panzer divisions. His strategy was bold but desperate. Unleash this powerful armored unit against the advancing Russian forces, push through toward Memel, move south, and establish a connection with Army Group Center. It was a slim hope, but it was the only hope they had. This desperate gamble marked the beginning of a series of monumental battles that would rage through the fall and winter of 1944. Battles that would pit German Panzer crews, fighting with the skill and determination of cornered veterans, against massive Soviet armored forces equipped with the fearsome IS-2 heavy tank. At the heart of this inferno stood men like Hermann Bix. Sergeant First Class Hermann Bix was 30 years old in October 1944, a veteran by any measure. He had recently been discharged from a hospital in Germany, recovered from a severe mortar injury that would have ended the war for most men. But Bix was eager to rejoin the action. He handpicked a fresh crew for his Panther tank and raced back to the front. The Panther was Germany's answer to the Soviet T-34, a medium tank that combined excellent mobility, good armor protection, and a powerful 75mm gun. With its sloped frontal armor and high-velocity gun, the Panther was arguably the best overall tank design of the war. But by late 1944, the Soviets had their own answer to the Panther, the IS-2 heavy tank. The IS-2 was a monster. Weighing 51 tons, slightly heavier than the Panther, it mounted a massive 122mm gun originally designed as an anti-fortification weapon. That gun could penetrate a Panther's frontal turret armor from 1,500 meters away, it could punch through the mantlet from 500 meters, and it could destroy a Panther with a side shot from 3,500 meters. The Panther, by contrast, had to close to within 600 meters to have a chance of penetrating the IS-2's frontal armor. At ranges beyond that, Panther crews were forced to target weak points: the turret ring, the lower hull, the sides, and rear. The IS-2 had one critical weakness: its rate of fire. The massive 122mm shells came in two pieces and required 15 to 30 seconds to load in combat conditions. The IS-2 could manage only 2 to 4 rounds per minute on a good day. The Panther, by contrast, could fire 6 to 8 rounds per minute. This meant engagements between Panthers and IS-2s often became deadly games of positioning and timing. The IS-2 had the advantage at long range, where its gun could penetrate while the Panthers could not. The Panther had advantages in mobility, rate of fire, and at close range, where its gun could target weak points. For Panzer aces like Bix, survival meant understanding these dynamics instinctively, closing the distance when necessary, using terrain for cover, hitting first, moving constantly, never giving the enemy a stationary target, and above all, never panicking when a 51-ton monster with a 122mm gun turned its attention toward you. The First Battle of Kurland started on October 27, 1944, with a thunderous Soviet artillery barrage commencing around 6:30 in the morning. 2,000 guns of various calibers opened fire along the entire front. The earth itself seemed to shake from the bombardment. Under the cover of this massive barrage, which gradually shifted northward, Soviet tank and infantry brigades went on the attack. The main thrust focused on the 30th Infantry Division, but soon the 4th and 14th Panzer Divisions were also under assault. It was during this chaos that Bix received urgent orders. 2 Panthers were trapped in a dense, hostile wooded ravine. Their crews were surrounded by Soviet infantry. If they weren't extracted immediately, they would be destroyed or captured. Undeterred by the danger, Bix maneuvered his Panther through the cover of night to reach his imperiled comrades. It was a treacherous journey. Soviet forces controlled much of the surrounding area. The ravine was steep and heavily wooded. One wrong move could leave Bix's tank as trapped as the Panthers he was trying to save. As Bix approached the ravine, positioned on the ridge overlooking it, a Soviet Maxim machine gun's muzzle flash pierced the darkness. Responding swiftly, the Panthers retaliated with machine gun fire, silencing the threat. Bix scanned the surroundings from the cupola of his Panther. Suddenly, a streak of tracer fire zipped past him, followed by a deafening explosion nearby. Soviet infantry was advancing behind his Panther, attempting to cut off his escape route. The situation was critical. Bix's turret was oriented backward due to towing operations, completely wrong for engaging the infantry threat. But Bix improvised, a skill that had kept him alive through years of combat. He used the Panther's 75mm main gun to unleash high-explosive rounds at point-blank range, driving back the encroaching Soviet infantry. "I've got to get us out of these woods before the Russians close in for the kill," Bix called to his driver. "Move forward." "I can't go any faster," the driver replied. The tank was damaged going into the gully. It was a desperate, grinding escape. The damaged Panther crawled through the ravine while Soviet forces tried to trap them. But slowly, painfully, all 3 Panthers navigated their way out of the woods. By the break of dawn on October 28th, they had successfully escaped. The exhausted crews allowed themselves a moment of relief. It was very brief. Through the night, the Soviets had deployed additional tank forces to the front lines, positioning Bix's Panthers on a collision course with fresh enemy armor. And that's when Gunner Kruk spotted them emerging from the woodline, T-34s, and behind them, the massive shapes of IS-2 heavy tanks. Bix's decision was instant and instinctive. Kruk, the big one, first. The first rule of tank combat is to eliminate the biggest threat immediately. The IS-2 was that threat. Its 122mm gun could kill all three Panthers with just a few shots if left unchecked. Kruk swung the gun with practiced precision. The Panther's excellent optics allowed him to acquire the target quickly at 800 meters, a range where the Panther's gun would struggle to penetrate the IS-2's frontal armor, but where hitting vulnerable points was possible for an expert gunner. The first round flew down range. Bix watched for impact. A hit, but no penetration. The IS-2 was still functional, and now it knew where they were. Again, Bix ordered calmly. Kruk's second round struck the IS-2 between its turret and hull, a weak point where armor was thinner. The heavy tank's cannon drooped downward, the turret mechanism damaged or destroyed, but the IS-2 was still dangerous. Once more, the third round pierced the disabled IS-2's armor. Flames erupted from the exposed turret hatch. Then the entire tank blew up with a massive explosion as ammunition cooked off. One IS-2 destroyed, but the battle had just begun. The remaining two Panthers engaged the T-34s, while Bix's crew dealt with the other IS-2s. Within minutes, 4 T-34s were burning wrecks. But the Soviet tanks were adapting, attempting to maneuver for better firing positions. The remaining T-34s diverted their course, aligning parallel to the trio of Panthers. This was dangerous. It gave them clear flanking shots while presenting their own frontal armor. "Shift to the left," Bix commanded. The three Panthers swiftly maneuvered, navigating to a shallow depression and seeking cover behind a cluster of bushes. "Let them approach within 500 meters," Bix directed over the radio to the other commanders. "Once they're exposed in the open, we'll open fire, but only together, on my mark." It was textbook German armored tactics. Use terrain for concealment, let the enemy expose themselves, then strike with coordinated fire. The Germans might be outnumbered, but they had advantages in crew training, coordination, and tactical discipline. As they waited, the rumbling noise indicated the enemy tanks were reorganizing for another push. "Prepare, they're approaching," Bix alerted his comrades, even though the T-34s were still in a blind spot. He directed his gunner, "Aim for the one trailing at the far right flank." "I've got visual, Bix," exclaimed Borkman, the commander of the 2nd Panther. A moment later, the commander of the 3rd Panther confirmed, "I've got eyes on them as well." "Wait until they're closer," Bix cautioned. The T-34s ventured into the center of the open field, unknowingly entering the killing zone Bix had prepared. Bix took a moment, clearing his throat. Then his voice echoed with unmistakable clarity through the other commander's headphones. "Open fire!" Kruk's first round struck with precision, ripping the right forward road wheel off one of the enemy tanks. The stricken T-34 attempted a sudden maneuver, returning fire in haste. But before it could unleash another round, Kruk's subsequent shot found its mark, engulfing the tank in flames. The rest of the T-34s halted their advance, firing at the visible muzzle flashes emanating from behind the bushes in the shallow depression. Already 4 of the Soviet tanks were ablaze. Caught off guard by the sudden and fierce German onslaught, the Soviets hesitated, taking a moment to gather themselves. Sensing this pause, Bix capitalized on the opportunity. He swiftly directed his Panthers to retreat, concealing them behind a different cluster of bushes in another sunken area. As the Soviets resumed their advance, unknowingly exposing themselves in the open field again, Bix seized the moment. "Open fire," he commanded over the headphones. In response, the Panthers swiftly unleashed their firepower. Within moments, more T-34s were engulfed in flames, billowing black smoke into the sky. The remaining Soviet tanks retaliated, firing in the direction of the concealed Panthers. But Bix wasn't finished. While his 2 companion Panthers provided covering fire, he maneuvered his Panther around the Soviet flank. It was a dangerous move, exposing his tank to enemy fire while on the move. But Bix had learned that in tank combat, aggression often wins. Stopping and firing while in motion, he crashed back into the woods, using the trees as cover. From his new position, Bix spotted two T-34s, attempting to outflank the two Panthers still positioned in the hollow. He took aim. His Panther jolted from the recoil as the first shot ignited one of the T-34s in a fierce explosion. The second round disabled the tracks of the other Soviet tank, immobilizing it. Faced with relentless fire from armor-piercing rounds and recognizing they were outmatched, the remaining Soviet tank crews opted to retreat, heading toward another wooded area approximately a mile away. "Great job, Bix," hailed a Panther commander over the radio. Bix nodded in acknowledgement, though no one could see him. "We need to move out fast. Ivan won't waste time before pouring fire down on us." Shortly after the Panthers departed their position, a deluge of mortar rounds and Katyusha rockets bombarded the hollow, confirming Bix's foresight about the imminent danger from enemy artillery. The engagement was over. Bix's 3 Panthers had destroyed 1 IS-2 and at least 8 T-34s without losing a single vehicle. But the day was far from over. The following day, October 29th, the Soviets managed to breach the German main line of defense, displacing the grenadiers from their positions. Shortly after, Bix's tank unit set off to counterattack and soon encountered Soviet forces. A mix of tank units comprising T-34s and IS-2s attempted to deflect the German counterattack, initiating a fierce battle. Over a span of 7 intense hours, the Panzers managed to repel Soviet tanks in brutal, grinding combat. During the engagement, Hermann Bix's Panther sustained multiple hits. The tank's armored skirts were torn apart. Storage compartments were punctured. Significant damage occurred to the tank's armor plates. Despite the extensive damage, Bix's Panther persevered and continued to fight on. Within the initial hour, Bix and his crew exhibited exceptional prowess, eliminating 3 enemy tanks. Recognizing the imminent threat of a Russian armor onslaught against the grenadiers, they intervened decisively. Bix's team took down 3 additional tanks, compelling the remaining enemy forces to retreat. As a tense 2-hour confrontation unfolded within the forest near the heights, it seemed as though the Russian forces might overpower the German Panthers. In a critical moment, Bix's timely intervention rescued Borkmann's crew, who were almost at the brink of defeat. But advancing cautiously, Bix encountered a T-34 that had cleverly positioned itself by reversing into a broad trench, remaining concealed in ambush. Unaware of the tank's presence, Bix was caught off guard when the T-34's gun roared, igniting the fighting compartment of his Panther. Flames erupted inside. The crew fought to control the fire while simultaneously fighting the enemy. In response, Kruk fired, but the round sailed slightly above the T-34's turret without hitting its mark. The Russian tank fired again, this time striking the Panther's turret, but failing to penetrate the thick armor. In a swift retaliation, Kruk's second shot successfully obliterated the T-34's turret. Amidst the ongoing advance, a powerful impact rocked the Panther, resulting in a hit to the tank's right track. As a second T-34 moved in to deliver the finishing blow, Kruk swiftly targeted and fired. His shot found its mark, striking the T-34 head-on. The enemy tank erupted in a tremendous explosion. With this final engagement concluded, Hermann Bix's remarkable efforts had led to the destruction of 8 enemy tanks that day alone. While his Panther sustained considerable damage, aside from the track impairment, there were multiple holes in the armor and damaged internal systems. Bix considered himself fortunate. The crew managed to repair the track damage in an hour, getting the tank mobile again, but there was no rest. The battle continued. The engagements between Panthers and IS-2s throughout the Battle of Kurland revealed the strengths and weaknesses of both designs. The IS-2 was a breakthrough tank designed to smash through fortified defensive lines. Its massive 122mm gun could destroy bunkers, buildings, and any tank on the battlefield. Its thick armor, 120mm on the upper front, 90mm on the sides, up to 160mm on the turret, made it nearly invulnerable to most German anti-tank weapons. But the IS-2 had critical limitations. seconds. Its reload time of 15 to 30 seconds meant that in a duel with a Panther, it would get only one shot for every 2 or 3 the Panther fired. Its gun, while powerful, was difficult to aim precisely. It had been designed for indirect fire support, not precision tank combat. And like most Soviet heavy tanks, it suffered from poor visibility, limited crew comfort, and a tendency toward mechanical breakdowns. The Panther, by contrast, was designed specifically for tank versus tank combat. Its 75mm gun, while smaller, had excellent accuracy and a high rate of fire. Its sloped frontal armor, while thinner than the IS-2's, was well designed and difficult to penetrate. And most importantly, it had superior optics, better crew ergonomics, and excellent mobility. In actual combat during the Kurland battles, these factors created a complex tactical picture. At long range, the IS-2 had a significant advantage. It could penetrate the Panther from distances where the Panther couldn't hurt it. But at medium to close range, the Panther's rate of fire and accuracy gave it the edge. Experienced Panzer aces like Bix understood this instinctively. They used terrain to close the distance safely. They targeted weak points, the turret ring, the lower hull, the sides and rear. They coordinated with other Panthers to overwhelm individual IS-2s with multiple shots, and they never ever remained stationary. The tactic of halt, fire, and move that Bix employed was exhausting but effective. A moving tank is difficult to hit. A stationary tank is a dead tank. By constantly changing position, firing, and moving again, Bix made it nearly impossible for IS-2 crews to get clean shots at his Panther. The crew quality also mattered enormously. German Panzer crews in late 1944 were often veterans with years of combat experience. They knew their tanks intimately. They could identify targets quickly through superior optics. They could calculate ranges and lead moving targets instinctively. Soviet crews, by contrast, varied widely in quality. Some were excellent veteran tankmen who had survived since 1941. Others were fresh conscripts with minimal training. The IS-2 was a complex machine, and operating it effectively required considerable skill. In the hands of a poor crew, even the IS-2's advantages couldn't guarantee victory. By November 2nd, Bix had become something of a legend within the 4th Panzer Division. Other crews knew his call sign. Officers relied on him to be wherever the fighting was fiercest. And when Soviet armor appeared, everyone wanted Bix nearby. That day would test him like never before. In a dire life-or-death confrontation, Bix's tank alone faced a Soviet armored assault of unprecedented severity. 12 enemy tanks, a mix of T-34s and IS-2s, advanced toward German positions held by exhausted infantry who had no effective anti-tank weapons. If those Soviet tanks broke through, an entire section of the German line would collapse. Bix positioned his Panther in a hull-down position on a slight rise, using the terrain to conceal most of his tank, while keeping his gun elevated with a clear field of fire. Despite the grim circumstances, Bix's determination tilted the odds in his favor. His Panther's speed allowed him to relocate quickly when enemy fire grew too concentrated. His swift reactions meant he fired first in nearly every engagement. The competence of his crew, especially Kruk's exceptional gunnery, was instrumental in his success. Employing audacious tactics of halting, firing, and moving again, Bix navigated the engagement with daring maneuvers. One by one, the Soviet tanks were destroyed. T-34s brewed up from precise shots to their thinner side armor. An IS-2 was disabled when a shot to its tracks immobilized it, then destroyed with a follow-up round through its side. Confronted by overwhelming enemy numbers, Bix relied on his extensive experience to secure victory in this intense encounter. Leveraging every ounce of skill and tactical expertise at his disposal, when the smoke cleared, 12 Soviet tanks lay destroyed or abandoned on the battlefield. Bix's Panther, though damaged, was still operational. His crew was exhausted but alive. It was one of the most remarkable single-tank actions of the entire war. As the day came to a close on November 2nd, the Soviets called off their attack. Their tanks littered the battlefield, engulfed in flames and smoke. Hermann Bix and his crew, drained of their strength, exited their battered tank and sought refuge in a peasant hut, collapsing onto heaps of straw. Despite their exhaustion, sleep eluded them. The adrenaline was still pumping, the memories of the day's combat replayed in their minds, and they knew that with the night passing into a restless dawn, tomorrow would bring another day of battle, demanding their return to the fray once more. Across the entire Kurland front, intense tank battles had unfolded. In a 6-hour duel, the 510th Panzer Battalion's 4 Tigers managed to eliminate as many as 14 IS-2s and T-34s. The 30th Infantry Division's 6th Regiment contributed by destroying an additional 21 Soviet fighting vehicles, employing Panzerfausts and anti-tank mines. On the other hand, in the Auchadobele sector, the Soviet 10th Guards Division overwhelmed the 21st Luftwaffe Field Division. Responding to this threat, reinforcements were quickly deployed to the area, including the Pomeranian 12th Panzer Division and the 389th Infantry Division. Amidst the chaos, the 4th Panzer Division valiantly defended the Letila Hills, with Hermann Bix continuing to distinguish himself day after day. Undeterred by adversity, Bix and his courageous crew pressed on with relentless determination. But on November 4th, luck ran out. During a thunderous Katyusha barrage, a screeching rocket found its mark, striking Bix's Panther directly. The explosion was tremendous. Stunned and partially deafened by the impact, Bix and his crew struggled out of the wrecked tank. Bix, nearly bound for a hospital again, chose a short rest instead. His war wasn't over yet. Following a brief recovery period, he was back in action, leading counterattacks and relief attacks. By early November, the Soviet offensives began to wane, culminating in substantial losses of over 1,000 fighting vehicles. Despite seizing the town of Olts, their overall gains remained minimal. The German defensive victory during the First Battle of Kurland had been achieved, but at tremendous cost. The 4th and 14th Panzer Divisions, alongside 4 infantry divisions, incurred significant casualties, losing half of their combat strength. During the preceding month, Army Group North suffered a considerable toll, with 44,000 men lost in battle. Both German and Soviet forces capitalized on the temporary respite in hostilities, utilizing the lull to stockpile supplies and undertake vital unit reorganizations. By the end of November, both sides found themselves entrenched in a brutal, draining stalemate. By the close of 1944, the 4th Panzer Division underwent a transfer from Kurland to Danzig, marking a shift in their operational theater. For Hermann Bix and the survivors of his unit, the transfer meant escape from the Kurland Pocket, but not escape from the war. Despite Soviet efforts in the Second Battle of Kurland falling short of their aspirations, they managed to inflict huge casualties on Army Group North and marginally push the German forces closer to the Baltic coast. The pocket remained, growing smaller with each successive Soviet offensive but never quite collapsing. Army Group North would remain trapped in Kurland until the end of the war. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, over 180,000 German soldiers were still in the pocket. Some managed to escape by sea. Many others became Soviet prisoners of war. The battles in the Kurland Pocket demonstrated several important lessons about late-war armored combat. First, the IS-2, despite its impressive specifications, was not the war-winning weapon Soviet planners had hoped. Its slow rate of fire and poor ergonomics limited its effectiveness in tank versus tank combat, especially against experienced German crews. Second, crew quality mattered more than tank quality. Veterans like Hermann Bix achieved remarkable results, not because the Panther was superior to the IS-2, in many respects it wasn't, but because they knew how to exploit their tank's advantages while minimizing its weaknesses. Third, the Germans' tactical doctrine of combined arms defense, even when trapped and outnumbered, remained effective. The coordination between panzers, infantry with Panzerfausts, anti-tank guns, and artillery allowed them to achieve defensive victories against numerically superior forces, but none of this changed the strategic reality. Germany was losing the war. No amount of tactical victories in places like Kurland could alter that fact. The Red Army could replace its losses. Germany could not. Soviet factories produced thousands of tanks. German factories struggled to produce hundreds. For tankers like Hermann Bix, the Kurland battles represented the twilight of the Panzer arm. They had proven they could still win battles, still destroy multiple enemy tanks, still hold defensive positions against overwhelming odds. But they were fighting a losing war, and they knew it. The exact fate of Hermann Bix after Kurland is unclear. He survived the war, But like many German veterans, his post-war life remains largely undocumented. His actions in Kurland, destroying dozens of enemy tanks in just a few days, represent some of the most intense tank combat of the entire war. Today, the Kurland Peninsula is peaceful. The battlefields where Panthers and IS-2s clashed are now farmland and forests. Few physical traces remain of the desperate fighting that occurred there in late 1944, but in military history, the Kurland battles retain significance. They demonstrated the last gasp of German armored excellence. Veteran crews achieving remarkable results with good equipment and sound tactics, but ultimately unable to change the war's outcome. The duels between Panthers and IS-2s showed that both tanks had their merits. The IS-2 was a powerful breakthrough weapon with a devastating gun. The Panther was an excellent tank destroyer with superior handling characteristics. In the hands of skilled crews, either could prevail. But in the end, the war was decided not by which tank was better, but by which nation could produce more tanks, train more crews, and sustain losses while continuing to fight. In that contest, the Soviet Union held every advantage. November 1944, Kurland, Latvia, where Hermann Bix fought the battles of his life, where Panthers faced IS-2s in brutal grinding combat, where German tactical excellence met Soviet industrial might, where men fought desperately, knowing their sacrifice would not change the war's outcome, but fighting on regardless. In the frozen fields and forests of Kurland, the story of the German Panzer arm came to an end, not with a dramatic defeat, but with a slow, grinding attrition. Still dangerous, still capable of local victories, but ultimately, inevitably, running out of tanks, fuel, ammunition, and time. The tank that Hermann Bix climbed into on November 4, 1944, before the Katyusha rocket struck, might have been his last. Or perhaps he got another one. Perhaps he fought on until the final days of the war. The records don't say. But his actions in Kurland, destroying dozens of enemy tanks, rescuing stranded comrades, holding critical positions against overwhelming odds, represent the final chapter of German armored warfare at its finest and its most futile. The Panzer ace of Kurland, where tactical brilliance met strategic inevitability and lost.